Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. This week I'm going to take you step by step through servicing this Cervelo Soloist. This bike has been purchased as a winter bike, and whilst it looked okay on the surface, we uncover some big unexpected issues. This bike was in a lot of trouble really. You can hear, first of all, we've got very poor shifting on the rear derailleur. Grabbing between gears, it's not settling correctly. Initially it could either be an indexing issue or a cabling issue. As it was, I actually replaced the cable on this rear derailleur. Second problem I noticed here was the front derailleur cable was routed incorrectly around this front derailleur and it wasn't shifting gear nicely. You can see here from the small ring to the big ring, it's just not flowing up to that top bigger ring. It's grabbing on the bottom ring. That has actually caused some wear on the inside plate of the front derailleur, which I'll show you. So we'll sort that problem out as well. We've got a brake here that's pulling the wheel over. Note how that's pulling in the frame. You can see it at the top there, where it's pulling the tyre and the wheel, one side of the frame where it's not set up correctly. We've got this chain, which is worn way below the 0.5% that is recommended on an 11-speed chain for replacement. So the chain is life extinct. So we also need to replace that. So these are the initial assessments I make, and now it's time for me to strip the bike down and start cleaning everything up, servicing parts that need work. But look at this bottom bracket. This was very stiff, and this was one of the primary reasons why the customer brought the bike to us. He could feel that dragging, and this really presented us with a huge problem which you're about to see. I've never seen a chain set quite like this one, and you'll see that soon. The braking surface of these wheels was actually quite worn, and you'll see along the way that we actually switched the wheels out. By request of the customer, he brought another set of wheels that he had in with him. So we're actually going to swap these wheels out at the same time as the service. But I'm going to take the cassette off. You can see it's not too bad. The bike actually was spotlessly clean, but it just had its own issues through wear and age that we're going to resolve and sort out. We will put that through the ultrasonic cleaner, but the rest of the bike we're just going to wash off. So off comes this rear derailleur cable. At this stage I wasn't sure if it was just indexing or a cable and indexing, but as you'll see here, there's actually a couple of frayed off cables on this cable here. So these tags that are here, they're where the bite of the pinch bolt has been over tightened and it's actually cut through the cable. So with the poor shifting, I think it's time for a new cable on this particular bike. So I'm going to actually replace this rear derailleur cable. I'll cut that off a little bit higher, which will make it easier for me to actually get it off and out of the bike. That's initially what I'm going to do, but we'll remove this derailleur off of the bike as well. We're going to take all these main components off. You can see here again, reasonably clean, but everything on this bike was very wet. It was a very wet oil. I think it might have had a spray oil on it because there was quite a bit of wetness to this bike in places, but we'll resolve that as well. Front cable, although it had a little kink on it, didn't need replacing. We were able to reuse that cable. There was a few things on this bike that would have easily been able to have replaced, but it would have just racked up the costs unnecessarily for the customer. In fact, he's just purchased this bike and is having this service and the work that we're about to do on this bottom bracket. It really made no sense to over exaggerate the bill when things weren't really needed. So here comes the biggest problem with the bike. I start knocking this out, it's not coming out. I had to give it a good old tap, and look what's happened there. The bearing on the drive side has stayed with the chain set. It hasn't even come out in the bottom bracket. It's been forced out because of all this corrosion here. Look how corroded the shaft through the center of this chain set is. The bearing on the non-drive side was almost seized solid. It caused some rotation marks on this axle as well. But we're going to clean that up and reuse it, as you'll see shortly. We'll also show you a spin test once we've finished the work, so stay tuned for that. Again, it was one of those costs that could have almost outweighed the cost of the value of the bike to have replaced that chain set. So we clean everything up and make sure that it's all okay. Out comes that old bottom bracket. That is absolutely life extinct, and we're going to be replacing that one. Off comes the rear brake. Note by that pinch bolt there's a little tag of debris. It's actually packaging from the original bike, which I'm also going to sort out on the bench. And also notice there on the cable, the outer has come off in the thumb adjuster. It hasn't stayed on the cable. So the thumb adjuster also has that seized end in it. You can see here there's an end on that cable. and that stayed in the thumb adjuster on the rear, so we'll sort that problem out as well. Off comes the brakes. And then the other thing the customer asked me to do was to swap out the saddle. He had another saddle. He also gave his bike fit measurements, which we will actually adjust this saddle once it's on the ground and make sure that we've got that within tolerance of his bike fit. So you will see that I put this new saddle on, and you will notice that the angle does change slightly, but don't be alarmed by that, because we are actually going to do further work once we finish the bike to make sure that's in the right place. So this is just a temporary fit until we can measure everything to make sure we've got it to within his bike fit. Now see this little knobble here on the inner chainring? That should actually be in line with this pedal arm here. It should be tucked around the back. Both the big ring and the small ring have those, and it's to line up all these logos, and it also makes for a slightly better shift. A lot of these are designed to work in unison with each other to make that changing gear from the small ring to the big ring also easier, and also dropping from the big ring to the small ring. It helps it all engage, lines everything up with the teeth and everything that are on these chain rings. So we're going to take this apart. This is actually one of the parts that wasn't cleaned brilliantly. The teeth on these were quite greasy in between, where it had been cleaned but not as in depth as we deal with, so we're going to also sort those out. Now I initially thought I might just be able to tap this bearing off, thinking once it was off I could then clean up the shaft. You can see it is moving, but hardly at all. It was really digging into that rust. So I elected to actually knock it back down onto the spline and onto the shaft, and then I'm going to wet and dry where it was grabbing and clean that shaft up and get some of that initial rust off of this. I mean, these shafts are thick. They're designed to take many watts of power, far more than your average rider would ever put through them. So although this is unsightly, I don't think it's unsafe. I have wet and dried all this down, checked the integrity of it, and I was happy to put this back on the bike. There was no need to really replace it. It will outlast another bottom bracket, that's for sure. So off that comes. Off comes the little wave washer, and then at the bottom of this there's also an O-ring that actually had popped out of its little fitting. There's a little groove on this chain set that should sit in, and that wasn't sitting correctly. So now I've got those bits off. I'm just going to give this shaft a polish. That will help it go back in. It will make it smooth as I possibly can get it, and then it will also help me seat the bearings. We had some rotation marks on the end where the bearing went on the non-drive side, and that will also help that bearing seat and settle back to where it should be. It was only because the bearing had seized that we had the rotation marks. Everything was aligned okay when we put it back together, so it was all ready to go again. The main components on this bike, the derailleurs and the brakes, I'm only going to wash these down with warm soapy water. They were relatively clean, although this part needs work and the brakes need work additionally to washing them down. We are just going to wash them down initially without putting them through the ultrasonic cleaner, without using any degreasers on them, but we did put the cassette through the ultrasonic cleaner, and this is what I'm now washing down. This is literally the only components of this bike we put through the ultrasonic cleaner. So I wash each of those down. This is actually a 105 cassette on this bike, but they do always clean up nice to 105, so it's got to be said for them. They do always look nice once they're done. Big chainring wash down, and then we're going to deal with the chain set itself. So I'm putting a little bit of silicone grease here in the groove that O-ring sits in, and then I'll just drop that O-ring down and seat that back in the groove where it should be. That is okay to reuse, and then I can put the wave washer on top of that, ready to go back into the bottom bracket. So I'll go the wave washer there. Now I'm going to just lubricate the splines themselves before I put the chain rings on. This will help me take them apart should I ever need to again in the future. Helps everything seat and settle. And I'm also going to put a little bit of anti-seize grease here on the bolts that hold this chain set together. I'll work those in before I put them onto the chain rings, and then everything will be good for next time. So I've lined up the lug that sits on that larger ring, lined up that little knobble on the lower ring. You can see there the full speed ahead logo and the FSA logo on the smaller ring all now line up nicely. The tooth rates all line up nicely, and the BCD measurement on there also. So that's how it should sit when it's on the bike. Torque those bolts up, make sure they're absolutely spot on before they go back on the bike. Everything there is now ready to refit. With the rear derailleur, I am going to be lubricating here the thumb adjuster. I'm using a little bit of our anti-seize grease there, and then a little bit of our general purpose grease on the top there, and then the spring and the adjuster will go on there. I find these can seize and often do seize, so there's no harm in lubricating these. So that is now absolutely where it needs to be. And then I'm also going to lubricate the derailleur itself. So put a little bit of premium grease here on the spring to help that actuate and be smooth and also not get corroded. And then our general purpose oil on the pivot points here. We do sell these greases in our shop, but I'll talk about that shortly. But this front derailleur actually had its own problem, so I'll lubricate it up first. Premium grease on the main spring there, and these are a very common spot for rust, so it's good to wipe that over. And again, general purpose oil on those pivots. Normally this would be the stage where we could refit this, but these do have a sacrificial part on them, and it's this slider here. And where it wasn't changing gear, the chain was running along this significantly, and it's obviously been ridden a lot on this smaller gear. And you can see here how the chain has worn that away, really quite badly worn, but it is a wear part. So we are actually going to replace this slider as well on this front derailleur. You can see how it's really indented on the one spot there where the chain runs. So if this is fresh, it will also help push up that chain to the big ring, so we've replaced that as well. Now I've got to deal with the thumb adjuster on the rear brake, which we've already discussed had the end of the cable stuck in it. So I'll take that part. You can see how it's quite dirty inside there, and we've already washed this part down, so it shows how you can often miss parts just through washing and cleaning. And there is the cable end coming out. We've drilled that out, and you can see there that that's what we had stuck in this adjuster. So you can see the height of the one on the left, how it should be. It's quite a tall little fitting in comparison with this. I've obviously drilled it down till it caught on the drill, and that enabled me just to pull that out. So we'll replace that on the cable as well, slide a new one over the cable, and then that will sit in that adjuster nicely. Clean up the threads on this adjuster as well. This is a good example of why I lubricate and service thumb adjusters, even if they don't look like they need it, because often when you take them apart they're gummed up. I'll also lubricate the front brake as well. We didn't show that on camera, but we do both brakes the same. So that goes in and that's screwed right down, and that's ready for the new housing. Lubricate the pivots of the brake. They do have their own pivot points, and then they also have this little slider that slides in and out of a plastic fitting with this spring, and I'm using some of our silicone grease there to help lubricate that, and that will make a nice actuation and make it freely come off again. Now this is actually manufacturer's delivery packaging. I often see this on these calipers. It's left stuck on there. It's not needed for day-to-day use. It's purely to stop that brake getting damaged in delivery, and so I've removed that as well. So that's whole packaging there. Lubricate up these skewers for the replacement wheels, general purpose grease along the shaft, and then some anti-seize grease on the threads there, and that's ready to go back in the wheel. And then also I'm going to lubricate the hub body itself before putting the cassette onto this wheel. This wheel doesn't look like it's ever been used. It was pretty fresh. I don't think that's even ever had a cassette on that one, so a good wheel to put on a bike like this. Torque that up, and that's ready to go. Now this did actually need new tyres, so that's what we're going to do now. Whilst I'm fitting that tyre, I wanted to take a moment to say thank you to all of you for watching and supporting. We really do appreciate everyone's time each evening watching these services, and thank you to all the partners who have to sit and listen to me. Don't forget, Christmas is coming up if you want to buy one of our mugs as a present. The link to our shop is in the description of all the videos. If you have ever purchased from our shop, we really do appreciate it. Me and Simon make up all the parcels ourselves. We get them dispatched ourselves, and I always write a little note on the delivery note as well. We really do appreciate all the orders on the shop. So if you have supported us this year, thank you very, very much. It really is appreciated, and it's the way that we help make the YouTube journey worth our while. So that's the new wheels fully set up, and now we can detail the frame. It clearly been washed down for the sale, but there's no harm in doing it twice. And actually the white logos were noticeably grey and greasy when the bike came in, and we managed to clean them up quite a lot, and it was worthwhile for that alone. This was a textured matte paint job. It looked really striking and crisp in person, much more than on camera. And of course we're using the trusty Big Softy to work that grease away. And then a microfiber towel to dry this off and to draw all this water off. Again, the bike was in very, very good condition, very clean, but even by stripping it down we can get to areas that weren't quite as clean as they could be. Now this frame is absolutely spotless. Here I'm drawing through a cable guide through the frame to replace that rear derailleur cable. So this is the old cable coming out. I've put the guide through the frame. Would bring that out of the shifter itself, and then I can put a brand new cable into here. And what I'm using here is one of our own super slick cables. These are very tightly wound stainless steel cable. They give a lovely shift, they really do. Because they're tighter wound, they're narrower, and that's the secret sauce that makes them so smooth with their changing. So I always use these cables on a bike like this. Now we're going to turn our attention to the bottom bracket. This is a brand new bearing going in here. This is actually a Seabear ceramic bearing. Very nice bearing. Worlds apart from the original FSA bearing that was in this bike, and hopefully should last an awful lot longer than the previous one. I think this is a bit of a design flaw of this frame and this era of bike, in that the water is collected inside that bottom bracket area, but there was nowhere for it to go. So I think sometimes the water sits on the back of these bearings, but these have a very good seal in them, so it should stop that water getting in quite so fast anyway. And with the ceramic bearing, it shouldn't cause any rust issues of the cages that run the bearings inside these generally. So you can see here, spinning very nicely. It slows quite quickly, but that's only because it has fresh seals on the bearings, and they're really what's grabbing the races and slowing it down. But it spins beautifully and is completely different to how the bike came in with that seized non-drive side bearing that it had. Next up, I'm putting the front derailleur on. The cable is now routed correctly, which means I've got this longer tail sticking up. So I'm just going to nip that off and shorten it down a little bit so that it doesn't catch the tyre of the wheel itself. And so that's now sitting where it should be. Then I'll torque this up at this stage as well, because I'm going to do some adjusting on this, and it obviously adjusts in a left and right, and we don't want that moving on the bike. So I torque that up at this stage. I torque the rest of the components up all at once at the end of the service. In goes that brand new rear derailleur cable. Put that into its fitting and tighten that up, and that's absolutely spot on. And then I can just nip that tail off. I'm actually using a little guide here that I make up out of an old piece of cable with two ends on it. That way I can get all my cable lengths the same, and it's a way for me to also tell often when I've done work on bikes whether it's my own cable or not. Using some anti-seize grease here on the mount of that rear brake, and then we're going to pop that new cable end on the cable before fitting it back in that thumb adjuster from the one that we've previously removed. So I'm reusing these cables again, nothing wrong with them at all. They were absolutely spot on and okay. New cable end on there, and that's now ready to be used. And the same with the front. So again, same principle, anti-seize grease on the mount. They get very stuck and they can really corrode, so that's why I tend to do a good amount of grease on the mounts of these sort of brakes to make sure that I can actually get them apart again next time I service the bike. New cable ends on though, everything there is looking good. In goes this front wheel, so you can see there that the wheel has now changed. On goes that rear wheel. Again, new tyres and tubes on both of these, so that this is really set up nicely for the customer. And then a brand new Ultegra chain on here as well. So again, he'll have a nice fresh chain, everything lubricated up nicely, everything working. This bike will feel $1 million compared with how it did feel when he brought it in. Go through the gears. Now I'm just going to use a little bit of thumb adjuster here on the rear. Once it drops up the first gear, every other gear should be adjusted correctly. And you can see there how smoothly it goes up and down the gears. It's actually had quite a nice shift on this bike, so very pleased with that. And then the front one, again, that new plate and the cable fitted correctly and adjusted correctly, just instantly changes gear, much better than before. I noticed this brake block was actually low on the previous wheel as well as these new ones, so I adjusted that one. It was the only brake block that actually needed adjusting, which was random, but everything there is good. Front and rear brakes now working perfectly, so we've got all the gears and the brakes working safely. I'm now going to torque up the levers here, so just check the torque wrench settings on those. They're often loose on these bikes, but in this instance they weren't, they were okay. And then you can see here how the last one of these four, this one, was actually quite loose, and this is why I run through a bike with a torque wrench at the end of a service, just to make sure that everything is correct and to spec. Obviously I take a lot of parts off, like I've took this brake off, so it's important for me to torque those up and make sure that they are tight and correct and I give the bike back correctly. But also the components that I don't take off the bike also need checking, because I don't know who serviced the bike previously or how the bike's been used, but you can see here that seat post was loose. I need to make sure that everything is safe and sound and that all the nuts and bolts on the bike are correctly tightened. I did do the back brake as well, but we try not to repeat ourselves on camera, and then the mount and pinch bolt for the rear derailleur. The last thing I do is check the bottle cages. I just slacken those off and retighten them up to make sure they're not seized, and that's done. That's all the work completed. You can see here what a big difference we've made to this bike. Mechanically, we've done an awful lot to this bike. It's now shifting and changing gears nicely, where you haven't got that drag on that chain set through that damaged bottom bracket bearing, and everything is safe with the new tyres and so on. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do like and subscribe, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.